Hello and welcome back to Read Becca for a weekly chatty catch-up on everything I read, everything I'm currently reading, and everything I'm looking forward to reading for roughly the current week. And I had a great reading week this week. A little bit surprising, though I shouldn't have been. I picked up two women in translation works I had flagged for this month, The Housekeeper and the Professor by Yoko Ogawa and translated by Snyder, and Claudia Pinero's Elena Knows, translated by Riddle. I really enjoyed both of these, and I think mainly because they were so in conversation with each other and overlapping each other in ways I hadn't even put together going into this. So both of these engage with the topics of disability and chronic illness by featuring that as kind of the prominent element of the story. These stories have something else in their plot, but laboriously cover the day-to-day minutia of what it's like living in their states as disabled or chronically ill, the tiny aspects of every moment they have to think about or do in order to continue moving through the world just at its most basic, rather than even thinking about grander pursuits or thriving. Just simply going through the day is such an effort for each of these characters here. So I loved both of these for kind of different reasons, but also for that overlap. They both have very simple prose, I think, and yet I think they're both exercises in minimalism, where the prose is very rich and beautiful without being flowery or verbose in both cases. In particular, Yoko Ogawa really won me over with such lovely minimalist prose, and it gets across the beauty of math. So let's talk about that one first. But I think overlap of characters here, what is interesting here is the difference in us feeling so inside the characters. One of the books, The Housekeeper and the Professor, is from the housekeeper's perspective, outside, seeing someone go through mental disability. And Elena Knows is from inside, an interior perspective of Elena as she's moving through her day. And yet they both feel like they truly capture the characterization and feel very, very internal. So let's start with Housekeeper and the Professor. This one is following a housekeeper who has newly been hired via her service that she works for, the sister-in-law of a math professor. He was in a car accident years and years ago, and ever since that time has not been able to form new long-term memories. And his current memory that he's working from is only about 80 minutes. And so he is very stuck in a certain routine. He won't remember her for long-term, and he hasn't formed any new long-term memories. So he's lacking a lot of connection with the world. Most of his life is caught up in working through these math problems that he does for like contests. And so the housekeeper shows up and starts the job, and they immediately start making connections over math. So there is a lot of math in this book, but even if you don't understand it, I think you could probably skim through the mathy bits, but they are so beautiful. They come across as really lyrical elements, and the patterns give you a sense of wonder in the way that the math professor is expressing them to the new housekeeper. And actually, let me read a couple of passages on that. It wasn't immediately clear to me why my phone number was so interesting, but his enthusiasm seemed genuine, and he wasn't showing off. He struck me as straightforward and modest. It nearly convinced me that there was something special about my phone number, and that I was somehow special for having it. Soon after I began working for the professor, I realized that he talked about numbers whenever he was unsure of what to say or do. Numbers were also his way of reaching out to the world. They were a source of comfort. So I think that gets across this is something he can always return to in any situation he's in, and speak with enthusiasm and authority and feel a bit like his old self, even as he's struggling with not understanding where he is or what he's going through. And then slightly later on, the one topic we could discuss without any worry was mathematics. Not that I was enthusiastic about it at first. In school, I had hated math so much that the mere sight of the textbook made me feel ill. But the things the professor taught me seemed to find their way effortlessly into my brain, not because I was an employee, anxious to please her employer, but because he was such a gifted teacher. There was something profound in his love for math, and it helped that he forgot what he'd taught me before. So I was free to repeat the same question until I understood. Things that most people would get the first time around might take me 5 or even 10 times, but I could go on asking the professor to explain until I finally got it. And I just love that she was finding ways to connect, even when she kind of took advantage of that in order to get through to where she could have a conversation with him on the level. And because he was, constantly resetting, she could do that in a way that felt safe to her as well. So he wasn't always just talking down to her at any point. He treated her with respect even when she didn't understand throughout this. And I think that was what shone through in this book the most to me, is how much the housekeeper comes into this in such a place of good faith and openness to him. And she steps forward and treats him with a respect and a care that hasn't really existed in his life up until this point. And there are points that things are said about him that are very off the cuff and not really drawn attention to, but in the background, it's clear to me that a certain level of that respect has been lost for him. There is this element of everyone around having just sort of given up and decided that it doesn't really matter because he's not going to remember. And so there is this shock from the sister-in-law that they're actually building a friendship despite his lack of memory, as if he's not worthy of it because he has this mental disability and won't remember, that you can just let him be living in isolation and kind of loneliness because he won't form long-term bonds. Meanwhile, the housekeeper very much treats him as worthy and deemed of respect and treatment, that those 80-minute memories are still worth celebrating and having care taken into them. And so I just love that. I see so often where people do just discount others that they don't understand, whether that's from a mental or physical disability aspect, race or ethnicity. Even children and animals are very often bearing the brunt of being treated not as worthy of respect because they're just a child or just an animal. People and even parents often treat children as if they're property, as if they can just be dictated what to do all of the time and not have autonomy or any input into their lives and choices that impact their lives. Similarly, animals, people very often act as if you can just do the bare minimum and not enrich their lives in any way because they're just an animal. And this, for me, encapsulates that and really delves into that topic of people acting functionally as if there is some hierarchy of lesser or greater than being, and you can just sort of disengage if you deem someone to be that lesser level of being. And here it interacts with that with great empathy and consideration for a person who others have discounted. So I loved that. I found this just so quiet and very tender and gentle. Often with Japanese works, there's a detachment to some degree because showing emotion is so frowned upon in many ways, but here there is a lot of emotion. It's just very quiet and internal. And this really reached my heart, and I would be very surprised if it's not on my favorites of the year. And then I have Claudia Pinero's Elena Knows. This one is kind of a mystery, but that is not really the focus. Certainly the bulk of the pages are focused on Elena just moving through the world and the challenges of her going places and any single thing she does, her recalling back to her daughter in the past and experiences that they've had together, because this is all focused on the fact that her daughter has died, has taken her own life in the belfry of the church. And Elena knows that her daughter would not have done that. She's very sure. And I think one of the things that maybe I liked but didn't like that brought this down a little bit for me was just how abrasive Elena and Rita, her daughter, are. They're often at odds and disagreeing with each other. They're very headstrong characters, both of them. And I think that is very intentional. For me, Elena wouldn't make it through her day if she weren't as stubborn as she is. She's kind of that bulldog hanging on to something in this case, where she's very certain that her daughter didn't take her own life and wouldn't have in this scenario. And she goes after that even though no one else will believe her, because everything is pointing to that being the case. And so we're getting all those really tiny, difficult moments, and let me read you a little snippet from this one as well. She didn't want to go home to rest, like a neighbor suggested. Come back tomorrow, Elena, in the morning when it's light. As if the morning and the daylight were good things. What did that man know about what the morning meant to her? Forced to open her eyes once again, daylight signals the start of the fight she has ahead of her. From the moment she tries to get out of bed, pulling on her ropes until her unresponsive back unsticks from the wrinkled sheet, resting both feet on the cold floor tiles, gathered momentum to stand up, dragging her feet toward the toilet where she'll try to sit, to urinate, lower her underwear, try to stand, stand, drag her underwear up, tangled, damp, try to straighten it, and then after that, always a new challenge, as if the struggle just to go to the bathroom on her own in the morning weren't enough. Every morning, Elena wakes up from sleep to be reminded once again, for yet another day, what awaits her. If it were up to her, she'd have stayed sitting in that chair in that funeral parlor beside her daughter's body, staring foolishly at death, and she'd pretend that that day, the one she was living, would never end, and that another would never begin, if it were up to her. So you can see this goes over the litany of very minor details and really focuses in on them. But it also agonizingly looks at the emotionality of what she's processing and how much she's bouncing off the idea of what has happened. Is she still a mother now that she doesn't have a child? If it had been her who died, Rita would have been an orphan. What name does she have now that she's childless? Has Rita's death erased everything she was? Her illness did not erase it. Being a mother, Elena knows, isn't changed by any illness, even if it keeps you from being able to put on a jacket, or freezes your feet so that you can't move, or forces you to live with your head down. But could Rita's death have taken not only her daughter's body, but also the word that names what she, Elena, is? So this is grappling with those really big questions as well about motherhood, about parenthood, about what do you really know about your child. And she is going through this wonderful mystery while also taking us along on her day to day and giving us such a sense of care for her, much like the previous book, while also showing that she is a fallible human. And I just really like that aspect of her character. The fact that we are so in her head and she's not always likable and she's just so headstrong and often fights with the people she's trying to seek help from. She is just a really great, very realized character. So I think the characterization was what will pull you in for this one. So I very much enjoyed this one as well. I think Housekeeper and the Professor was the tops for me of these two, but these were fantastic ways to end the month on. So that is what I read this week. I'm still continuing on with my same works I've shown the past couple weeks. So Iraq Plus 100, I'm kind of picking up Mossflower again, but not very much. I'm mainly focused on 2 Book 2 Prize books right now. So those I can't really talk about until the end of the Book 2 Prize, but one of those is very, very large, and I think most of my weekend this weekend is going to be dedicated to getting through that 600 plus page book. So I think that's all for the reading stuff. Onward to my week. So in watching, I finally am back to some narrative type stuff, and I very much enjoyed Wicked Little Letters. This had been mentioned by my friend Shannon, and I absolutely loved it, but obviously I think most people would watch it because Olivia Colman is in it, so that was basically all I knew going in. I didn't really know what it was about. It is a historical movie, and it is very, very funny and satirical. So she is a spinster who lives with her parents, and they start getting these nasty letters, and everybody thinks it's the Irish floozy who has moved in next door with a foul mouth. They go on this campaign against this Irish young lady who is living next door, and it becomes the conflict between them, showing us what we know and don't know about each individual, and it's very, very funny. It has a really great cast. I think that very, very British. I think that Timothy Spall as her father was fantastic, but also incredibly hateable. And the movie just in general was so full of wonderful interpersonal dramas and commentation about the veneer of piety, I think, in a way that I really enjoyed. So I loved it. And then I also watched Ambassadors, a Mitchell and Webb series-ish. It's very short. It's only 3 one-hour episodes about being ambassadors. And it is very true to their usual kind of jaded, snarky humor. Kind of feels like the tone of The Office, but with being ambassadors to a little-known, very undesirable country called Tajikistan, where the regime there is not very favorable to British diplomacy, and they're constantly treading a hilarious and awful line with the leadership there. So I thought it was very funny, not their best work maybe, and it felt very incomplete because it was only 3 episodes. I didn't even check yet if there is more, but there was only the 3 episodes of what was available to me. So I liked it. I always like Mitchell and Webb though. So I think that is it for the watching of the week. On to life. Dusty has in fact returned, and that's that's pretty much all there is to my week. It was a lot of work and a lot of getting Dusty back into routine. The first night he was back, it was a little tense in the house, and I kept him mostly in his room. But with a little shepherding around the following couple days, we've gotten back into the old routine and dynamic between all of the cats, and he is doing very well. He's sleeping straight across from me in his usual old spot, as he always did before. So yeah, it's very nice to have him back. He's such a sweetie. What else? I think that's it for life stuff. So onward to recommendations. I have several recommendations this week, making up for the last couple weeks that I've missed them, I think. So the big one that you probably have already seen, but if you have somehow not seen, you must go check out. Jolene from Bookworm Adventure Girl and Lindy from Lindy's Magpie Reads put together and talked about a list of the best canlit of the 21st century in response to the New York Times list, I believe. So they put out a call on BookTube to compile this list and got suggestions from a whole load of people and got over 300 books, but they narrowed it down to 67 that had gotten multiple votes. So they did a lengthy discussion talking through that list, and it was a fantastic and really intriguing list of Canadian literature that I have mostly not read and need to. The next one that I have is Britta Bowler did a timely list of her favorite women in translation. So perfect for rounding out Women in Translation Month. Then Kim from Middle of the Book March put out a fantastic video on how to find great booktubers. It's not a list of individual booktubers to go seek out. It's tools and skills for yourself in how to diversify or focus your booktube channel subscriptions a bit. Because I think for most people, it is very overwhelming how much is out there. It can be hard to find things that are within your scope or interest. And so I think this is a toolkit kind of video to have in your back pocket if you are looking for how to find channels. And then finally, one that I'm a little heartbroken that I missed because I could have gone to it, was a discussion between Ann Leckie and P. Jelly Clark on Clark's recent release, The Dead Cattail Assassins from this year. And the two of them I've seen before in similar discussions, and they both are always so great in terms of not talking down or super seriously. Leckie always seems to get across in these. She very often hosts locally because she is local here, author chats like this. And she always gets across what a fan she is of the person's work, like that genuine enthusiasm for their writing. And I always love that she brings that to the author discussions. So I'm sad I missed out, but I definitely was happy I still got to watch it via the stream. So anyway, I think that's where I will leave it for the recommendations for this week. And as usual, I hope you're having a wonderful week. And that is all for me today. Thank you so very much for watching.